So, good evening, and today we're going to look at page 67, exercise 5, our grammar exercise, and we're going to talk about modal verbs, permission, obligation, and necessity, and of course other expressions to talk about permission, obligation, and necessity. So let's start with letter A. Can you see it says, look at the pairs of sentences with a partner, say if they are the same or different in meaning. In which pair of sentences is there a difference in register? Well, let's have a look at number 1. It is not permitted to use your phone here. You're not allowed to use your phone here. Number 2, you'd better finish your water before we go through security. You ought to finish your water before we go through security. Number 3, we're not supposed to walk along the riverbank. We mustn't walk along the riverbank. Number 4, you don't have to fill in the form now. You can do it later. You needn't fill in the form now. You can do it later. Number 5, we should have left home early. We had to leave home early. Okay, so these are our sentences. Let's have a look if they have a similar meaning or a different meaning, and if they have a similar or different register. Are you ready? Well, let's have a look at number 1. We have it there just underneath. Do you remember? It's not permitted to use your phone here. You're not allowed to use your phone here. Well, they are the same in meaning, but it is not permitted is more formal. Let's have a look at number 2. You'd better finish your water before we go through security. You ought to finish your water before we go through security. Well, they are the same register, but there's a slight difference in meaning. You'd better is stronger than you ought to. No, well, you'd better is más te vale. No, you ought to, deberías. No, and you'd better suggest that something negative may happen if you don't. That is, you'd better finish your water before we go through security because they will make you throw it away. No, hay consecuencias, no, más te vale. No, terminarlo, si no, they will make you throw it away. Okay, let's have a look at number 3. We're not supposed to walk along the riverbank. We mustn't walk along the riverbank. Well, these are the same register, but again, there's a slight difference in meaning. We're not supposed to walk suggests that we know we mustn't walk along the river, but we are still doing it. No? You're not supposed to talk in the library, pero ¿qué hace la gente? Pues hablar en la biblioteca. You're not supposed to park here, pero ¿qué hace la gente? Pues aparcar aquí. Okay? So we're not supposed to walk suggests that we know we mustn't do it, but we still are doing it. What about number 4? You don't have to fill in the form now. You can do it later. You needn't fill in the form now. You can do it later. These are exactly the same, meaning and register. And what about the last one, number 5? We should have left home early. We had to leave home early. Well, these are the same register, but they have a completely different meaning. Well, we should have means it was an obligation, but we didn't do it. No deberíamos de haberlo hecho, pero no lo hicimos. For example, looking back, it would have been a good idea to leave early. And we had to, it was an obligation and we did it. No tuvimos que hacerlo y lo hicimos. No? So there you have some sentences with permission, obligation, and necessity. Are you ready to look at our grammar bank? Page 152, please. Can you see? Page 152, 7a, permission, obligation, and necessity. Now, the first group we're going to look at is can, must, should, ought to, and had better. Do they all sound familiar to you? Well, maybe ought to is a synonym of should, no? And had better is what we mentioned earlier, no? If you don't do something, there will be consequences. No más te vale. No? Let's have a look, first of all, at number 1. I couldn't take any photos in the gallery, so I bought some postcards. If you want to apply for this job, you must be able to speak Spanish. We should or we ought to go to the motorway. It's much quicker. Now let's have a look at our explanation. The most common modal verbs for talking about permission and obligation are can and could, must, should and ought to. We can also use may I to ask for permission. May I use your phone? Pero solo pedir permiso, no conceder ese permiso, eh? No, only asking for permission. Now, what about number 2? Let's see. We should have or we ought to have gone on the motorway. It would have been quicker. Let's have a look at the explanation. We use should have, or ought to have, plus the past participle to talk about past events which did not happen and which we regret. No? And number 3, let's look at number 3. You'd better. There it is. Post the parcels today or they won't get there in time. Ahí está la consecuencia. They won't get there in time. Let's have a look. Number 3. Had better is stronger and more urgent than should or ought to, and is often used to give strong advice or even a warning, una advertencia. It normally refers to the immediate future. The negative is had better not. Be careful, we cannot contract. You had better not complain. Do you remember the song? I know it's very festive, but you'd better watch out. You'd better not shout. You'd better not cry. I'm telling you why. No, do you remember? Hombre, claro que es la consecuencia. Que no va a visitarte Papá Noel, no? So you had better, affirmative. You had better not, negative. Okay? Now, let's move on to must. Don't have to. Now, these are a little bit tricky. Let's see. You mustn't bring children under 12 into this restaurant. You don't have to tip here unless you think the service was especially good. Now, mustn't and don't have to are completely different. Be very careful. They are completely different. So mustn't is used to express an obligation not to do something. Hombre, una obligación para no hacer algo es prohibición, realmente. Si estás obligado a no hacerlo, está prohibido esa cosa, ¿no? Don't or doesn't have to is used to express an absence of obligation, ¿no? Que no hace falta, no es necesario, ¿no? Now also it says here, see Unit 1A, page 140 for information about have to, have got to express an obligation, ¿no? If you want to revise, page 140. Now let's look at this very nice verb need. Now in fact, I've prepared a little bit of extra information for you about the verb need, which I will send via email. So let's first of all look at number 1. You usually need to check in at least 2 hours before a flight leaves. You don't need to take a jacket. It's going to be a hot day, no? Affirmative and negative. So we use need and don't need to. No, need to, don't need to, plus the infinitive to say that something is necessary or unnecessary. Now you need to check in. It's necessary to check in. You don't need to take a jacket. It's not necessary to take a jacket. You can use these forms for habitual, general, and specific necessity. So far, so good? Okay. Well, then let's look at number 2. We needn't lock the car. Nobody will steal it in this village. Let's have a look at number 2. When we want to say that something is unnecessary on a specific occasion, we can use needn't plus infinitive without to. Very important. We treat it like a modal verb, no como si fuese un modal verb, como shouldn't, ¿no? Can't, mustn't, ¿no? Colocamos N apóstrofe T y perdemos ese to, muy importante. Now, don't need to or needn't. We use don't need to, not needn't for habitual or general necessity. For example, I don't need to wear glasses. Habitual or general. My eyesight is still good. You cannot use I needn't wear glasses. Okay, because it is for specific occasion. Okay, how are we doing? So far, so good? Well, let's look then at number 3. We needn't have booked. Ahora vamos al pasado, ¿no? Needn't have booked. Can you see? Haber reservado. Didn't need to book. Pues pasado simple, ¿no? The restaurant is empty. Now, this is really interesting. Let's have a look at number 3. When something was not necessary, but you did it, you can use either needn't have plus the past participle or didn't need to plus the infinitive. Okay? Let's look at our example again. We needn't have booked the restaurant. No, we didn't need to book the restaurant. The restaurant is empty. My question is, did you book? Yes, you did. So in this case, you did something which was not necessary, but you did it. We needn't have booked, but we did. We didn't need to book, but we did. Okay, let's have a look at the last one with need, number 4. Are you ready? And we go for pink. We had plenty of petrol, so we didn't need to stop, which saved time. Now, this is an interesting one. Let's have a look at number 4. When something was not necessary, so you did not do it, there's the key, you must use didn't need to. Not, we had plenty of petrol, so we needn't have stopped, which saved time. Claro, porque si digo we needn't have stopped, sí que paramos. Hicimos algo que no hacía falta hacer. Let's see, compare. We didn't need to book. It wasn't necessary. We may have booked or we may not have booked. But we needn't have booked means we booked, but it wasn't necessary. So we need to be very careful there with needn't, no? Needn't have, because it means we did something that wasn't necessary. Okay, shall we continue? Be able to, be allowed to, be permitted to, be supposed to, or be meant to. Let's have a look. Number 1. From tomorrow, we won't be able to park in this street. You're not allowed to smoke in any public buildings in our country. Let's have a look at number 1. We often use person plus be able to or be allowed to plus infinitive instead of can. No? So be able to, be allowed to plus infinitive instead of can to talk about what is possible or permitted. We don't use it isn't allowed to. So we don't use it. Can you see? We don't use it. It must be a person. No? It isn't allowed to take mobiles into the exam room. No, you aren't allowed to take mobiles in. So it must be a person, no, as the subject. So far, so good. Let's have a look now at number 2. Let's go for blue this time. It is not permitted to take mobiles into the exam room. So number 2, we use it plus be permitted to plus the infinitive is used in formal situations. For example, notices and announcements to say what can or can't be done according to the law, the rules, or the regulations. But again, it's formal, and this one does use it. It is not permitted plus to plus infinitive. No? And finally, number 3, let's have a look. We aren't supposed to or we aren't meant to check in at 3:30. What's the time now? Oh, excuse me, we are supposed to. We are meant to check in at 3:30. What's the time now? You aren't supposed to park here. You aren't meant to park here. It's a hospital entrance. Well, we use be supposed to or be meant to plus the infinitive to say what people should or shouldn't do. Often because of the rules. There is often a suggestion that the rules are not necessarily obeyed. For example, students are not supposed to have guests after 12, but everyone does it. Now, students are not meant to have guests after 12, but everyone does. ¿No? So hay un elemento ahí de desobedecer en las normas. ¿No? Now, let's have a look at our exercises. Now, take a moment to have a look. Letter A. It says, circle the right form, tick if both are possible. For example, we weren't allowed to go out at night when we were at boarding school. Now, both of these options are correct. Now, we couldn't go out. We weren't allowed to go out. It was forbidden. No? Estaba prohibido. Now, let's have a look at number 1. You aren't supposed to park here, but everyone does. You aren't meant to park here, but everyone does. What do you think? Both are correct. No, you aren't supposed to or you aren't meant to. Essentially, they are synonym expressions. What about number 2? You'd better not use his computer. He hates other people touching it. Or, you don't have to use his computer. He hates other people touching it. Which one? Or maybe both. What do you think? Well, of course, you'd better not, because there are consequences. No, he hates other people touching. No, más te vale no utilizarlo. What about number 3? I shouldn't have Lost my temper last night. I feel really guilty about it now. Or I mustn't have lost my temper last night. I feel really guilty about it now. Which one? Or maybe both? What did you choose? Well, I shouldn't have. Oh, claro, ahora me doy cuenta de que era mala idea, ¿no? Que no debería de haberlo hecho, ¿no? Pero lo hice. Number 4. It is not permitted to take flash photographs in this museum. Or it is not allowed to take flash photographs in this museum. What about this one? What do you think? It is not permitted. Hombre, claro, not allowed tiene que tener un sujeto que es una persona. You are not allowed to take flash photographs. No? What about number 5? You can pay cash here as they don't accept credit cards. You need to pay cash here as they don't accept credit cards. What do you think? Well, you need to, es necesario, ¿no? Necesitas hacerlo, no es que puedes hacerlo, no, tienes que hacerlo, es necesario. Number 6, you are allowed to drive in the UK when you are 17. You are able to drive in the UK when you are 17. What do you think? Both are correct. These again are synonym expressions, no? What about number 7? We didn't need to get a visa, which was lucky as we only booked our holiday at the last minute. Or we needn't have got a visa, which was lucky as we only booked our holiday at the last minute. What do you think about this one? Well, we didn't need to get it, so no lo hicimos. No, no era necesario y no lo hicimos. We didn't need to get a visa, which was lucky as we only booked our holiday at the last minute. What about number 8? You really ought to have got specialist advice about your back problem, or you really should have got specialist advice about your back problem. What about this one? Well, ought to have got special advice about your back problem. Now, I'm going to say, I will accept also, you should have got specialist advice about your back problem. Aquí acepto yo los dos, las dos opciones. Number 9, you better or you'd better be on time tomorrow, or you may be thrown out of class. Well, of course, it has to be you'd better, porque la primera no tiene ese apóstrofe de, no tiene el had, no? And number 10, you don't have to bring your car, we can go in mine. You needn't bring your car, we can go in mine. What do you think? Both are perfectly acceptable. So just be careful there with number 8. I'm going to close it and I'm going to mark it, because in number 8, I will accept both of them. Okay, you really should have got specialist about your back. You really ought to have got specialist advice about your back problem. Okay, now let's have a look at letter B. Now again, give yourself time to check, but let's see. Complete the sentences with 3 words. If you don't finish your homework, you won't be able to watch TV. Now, let's have a look. Are you ready? You don't go into the art gallery. Entrance is free. You don't have to pay. It's not necessary. We remind you that this is a non-smoking flight. Smoking is not permitted, falta el ed, perdón, permitted anywhere on the aircraft. Number 3, you'd better not be late. You know what Jane is like about punctuality. What about number 4? You needn't pay me back until next month. I'm in no hurry for the money. Number 5, you shouldn't have said you didn't like pasta. You know how sensitive he is about his cooking. Number 6, it was a difficult journey because we had to change trains 3 times. Number 7, a lot of people think that governments ought to do more to protect young people's health. You aren't allowed to smoke e-cigarettes in pubs in the UK. Number 9, we didn't need to bring sweaters after all. It's really warm. And number 10, am I supposed, falta la de, supposed to wear a suit to the wedding, or is it quite informal. Now, those are our exercises with permission, obligation, and necessity. Now let's go back to page 67, and I'm going to invite you to look at the speaking exercise. Now it says talk in small groups. Imagine the following rules or laws have been proposed for your country. Would you be in favour of them or not? Say why. Try to use expressions from the box. Well, let's have a look at the expressions from the box. Talking about rules. I think, I don't think. People should be allowed to. We ought to be encouraged to. Parents should be made to. It should be against the law too. It should be illegal too. It should be compulsory too. Or it ought to be banned. Now, let's see. We've got on the road, at home, public health, society. Now, feel free to take a look at these questions and answer them via WhatsApp if you fancy. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again tomorrow.